Hey everyone, I hope that you're enjoying Written with Purpose, the 2021 author series in which I talk to authors of Black science fiction and fantasy about their writing journey, about their book or books, and also about their work in community, and where I engage you, the audience, in discussions about all these kinds of topics. So video number, where are we? 6 is an interesting one. So I am actually filming this video before I interview the author. And I did this because C.L. Polk is a new to me author. And there is a really interesting backstory to how they got involved in the Written with Purpose series. So I found out about C.L. Polk because they're a Canadian author and they were shortlisted, as well as Francesca Ekwasi, for the Canada Reads competition done by CBC every year. And I was like, wow, cool, who's this person? And so I could clearly see that C.L. Polk is a Black person, and also found out that they're non-binary, and I was like, wait a minute, what? In Canada, and I've not heard of them? What's going on? So we had a wonderful conversation because I wanted to learn more about their work and wanted to find out if C.L. Polk's work was a good fit for my reading interests, because as you know, I read Black science fiction and fantasy that centers not white characters, I always do this, that centers Black characters. And so we had a great discussion, and I learned a little something about C.L. Polk and writing Black characters and what that all means in terms of their own writing journey. I will leave it at that. But after having that conversation, I was even more interested in reading the entire series, because this series doesn't actually start with centering Black characters, and there's a very interesting story behind that. So I've currently finished reading book number 1 of the series. I will be finishing book 2 and 3, and then I will be interviewing C.L. Polk next week. But we're here batch filming, and so I'm going to tell you a little bit about C.L. Polk. C.L. Polk is the author of the World Fantasy Award-winning novel Witchmark, the first novel of the Kingston cycle. Their newest novel, The Midnight Bargain, was a finalist in the CBC Canada Reads competition and was nominated for the Nebula, Fire Ignite, and World Fantasy Awards. After leaving high school early, they have worked as a film extra, sold vegetables on the street, and identified exotic insect species for a vast collection of Lepidoptera before settling down to write fantasy novels. Mix Polk lives near the Bow River in the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, the Tsuut'ina and Yaakse Nakota nations, and the Métis Nation, Region 3. They keep all their stuff in a tiny apartment with too many books and a yarn stash that could last a decade. They ride a green bicycle with a basket on the front. They drink good coffee because life is too short. They spend too much time on Twitter, and you can subscribe to their newsletter or on Tiny Letter, or subscribe to their Patreon for content that writing nerds like. Okay. That's the best bio ever, and I really love the picture that accompanies it. So let me talk to you a little bit about the Kingston cycle. C.L. Polk's historical fantasy series, The Kingston Cycle, combines a world of witches and wizards with an enchanting Edwardian England setting. Miles Singer, born with magical abilities, hides who he really is and joins the war efforts to escape his troubled past. But when desperate measures force him to use his healing powers, his true character is exposed and there's no turning back. This gas lamp historical fantasy series, full of impossible romances and action-packed wizard battles, begins with a critically praised Witchmark. So Witchmark was amazing. You can go up here to see a video where I'm reading it or talking about it or vlogging about it. It was a whole thing. I really enjoyed it, and I hope you enjoyed my discussion with C.L. Polk. Thank you. Thank you very much for agreeing to chat with me, and for sharing your books with me. And even like our pre-conversation, I really appreciate the opportunity to have gotten to know you a little bit better and your work a little bit better, because that context really helped me to read more purposefully, and more mindfully. So thank you very much for being a part of this.
Thank you. I was really glad to be asked.
I found out about your writing through the Canada Reads competition, and that's where I found out about you. And I have to say, like, when I first saw your name, I was like, okay, I don't know that person, and that person is Canadian, and they are Black, and they are writing, and how do I need to know who CL Polk is. I need to know what they've been writing. I need to know their entire story, because I feel entitled to know everybody who's writing any kind of like fantasy or science fiction in the country. And it's funny because that sense of ownership and entitlement, I didn't really, know that I felt it as strongly as I did until I saw your name and felt like a desire to reach out to you and be like, I need to know everything. So yes. So this is super, super, super special. And having learned more about your writing and how much of it there is, and having now experienced it, it is quite a pleasure to be able to speak to you. I wanted to sort of just start with just talking about your writing journey. As a reader, especially a reader of works of science fiction and fantasy, anything speculative, I always get really interested in when the writer became the writer. So can you, like, when did you know that you wanted to be a writer? What was that moment like for you?
Okay. I think there were a lot of moments where I knew that that was what I was going to do, but for whatever reason, I set it down. But I think maybe the most important one was about 22 years ago. I was a fantasy reader at that point, an avid one. I'd been reading fantasy for years. And there was this huge fantasy series by this obscure author named Robert Jordan. His series was called The Wheel of Time. And I was on a fan forum for like Wheel of Time fans. I was doing a lot of like mid-book series speculation about like who among the Aes Sedai is Black Aja, and what's going on, like which one is actually one of the major dark friends hiding in the White Tower. This was like what I really wanted to know. And we had discussions, and there was a forum specifically for writing fan works, and I read them. Like I read a bunch of them, and I was like, that's kind of neat. I mean, I used to write stuff. This was a thing I used to do. Maybe I could do it again. And so I'm on the internet. So I was like, how do I learn how to write science fiction and fantasy? And I got a connection to a website called the Del Rey Online Writing Workshop. It was specifically for science fiction and fantasy writers. And I joined. And then I was like, oh, well, I need to like write a story so that people can like give me feedback and I can learn how to do this. So I came up with an idea and I started writing it, and it was the idea for a novel, and it was just like stuff off the top of my head. I was like world building on the fly. I had these things that I needed to do. And then I put the first chapter out, and what happened was like the very first thing I had seriously written, like I'm actually going to write a story, got like, they used to pick like stories of the month, where they would pick like the best story and a couple of alternate stories. And the very first chapter that I had written of this book that I just like improvised got picked as one of the alternate chapters for feedback. And I was like, oh, maybe my English teacher was right. So I went into it, like I dove in head first. I was dead serious about, like, I want to be really good at this. I want to have the abilities to write a really good story. I put that novel aside because I decided that what I wanted to do was I wanted to write short stories, because there was kind of this romantic career path, which was you make a name for yourself by selling short stories to the magazines, and then everybody knows who you are. And then when you write a novel, everyone's going to be ready for you. And I mean, this was before self-publishing was a thing. Like, this was like 1999. And so I set to it. I had a goal. The Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America needed me to sell 3 short stories at professional rates, and by gum, I was gonna do it. And so I wrote a short story that was kind of a dark fantasy, tinging into horror kind of thing. First draft was terrible, and then I fixed it, and then I sent it out, and it got bought. So the first short story I ever wrote got bought by a professional magazine and was like a qualifying credit for my goal. And then I started to get really perfectionistic. Like, everything had to be amazing. Everything that I did had to be really, really, really good. And if it wasn't really, really, really good, I would fall apart. I would just like break down and doubt myself and have anxiety attacks. And I kept that up for a few years, where I would write a story and then I would decide that there was a tiny thing wrong with it, and then I would throw it away because it was no good to me. It didn't fit my purpose. And I did it really unfairly. Like, I judged my work unfairly. And finally, like, the perfectionism and the anxiety got so strong that I came to a decision. It was like, if I don't stop writing, I'm going to make myself incredibly sick. I'm going to ruin my health. I have to stop. I have to get my mental health together. Like, I can't do this. I have to quit. And I quit. 2007, 2006, somewhere there, I stopped writing. I stopped. And I just thought that it was something that I couldn't handle. And I went to psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists, narrative therapists, mental health social workers. I went to groups. I went to like Reiki healers. Like, I wanted to be fixed. I wanted my problem solved. And I did it for a few years, like many years, in fact, and didn't really feel like I was getting good results. And then my psychiatrist was like, we could try a thing where I could add this medication called Abilify to your present medication to see if it helps. And if it doesn't work, well, then we can just quit. And I was like, okay, well, let's try it. So he gave me the dose of Abilify, and I took it home and I took it. And on the second day I took Abilify, I literally woke up. I opened my eyes and I said, I feel like writing something. That's weird. What do I want to write? And I went and like wrote a thing. It was a fan fiction. And I didn't stop. It was fun. I'd caught the fever, I guess. And so I wrote a couple more like long fanfic works. And then I came up with the idea for Witchmark. And so I took the time to think about how I was going to write it. And then I wrote it really, really quickly. The first draft, I think it took me about 8 weeks. It was a mess, but I fixed it. And because of when I had like gotten my main guidance about writing, one of the things that I had been taught was write it, send it, see what happens, write something else. The idea that if I wrote original work, it had to be for publication was something that they just taught everybody. It's like, this is what you do when you're a writer. So I did it. I sent my first book out. And it got published. Things started happening and I was a writer, but it came down to like a curiosity where I was like, can I do this? And so I decided that I was going to try. And yeah, that's like when I became a writer. That's how it happened. That's how I got to the point where I needed to stop to take care of myself. But as soon as I was at a certain point, I picked it right back up again.
Thank you for sharing that and for your transparency, because I think that some, bios only tell us so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, for me, I've started to play with writing. I've written my first bad short story and I'm very proud of myself. But like, I have definitely had things happen in my life that have impacted the speed at which I'll try something new. And so it is quite inspiring to hear you say that you noticed right away that you were being a perfectionist. And there's so many reasons why, we become perfectionists in this society right now. But to know that like you went on that journey, you figured it out, you were able to heal in all the different ways that you did. And then you're, that came right back to you. Like, I think what I'm hearing is that you're talented, right? Because, people recognize very early on that your writing was writing to read and watch and to celebrate very early on. That's why your work was chosen and you had like that instant success. I can also see that also, being where some of that pressure would come in, because like very early on you were picked up as and noticed and recognized and acknowledged for the talent that you so obviously have. I'm so glad that I'm happy that your psychiatrist was like, how about trying this thing? And that it worked, and that that resulted in you getting back on and writing things. So thank you for sharing that. You also, in your bio, it also talks about the fact that you left high school early. What exactly does that mean? And how did that impact like what you learned about the actual like techniques of writing?
Well, I left high school early. I had to get a job so I could pay my rent. And the thing is that I kept running up against this thing where I would try to tell teachers who were teaching courses in the last block of the day. It's like, look, I can't come to your class on Thursday because my shift starts too early, because my employer wasn't very considerate of my time. But if I can like get the material, I can do the work and return it to you quickly. But what ended up happening is that they would record an absence. And because of the attendance policy in the school that I was in the year that I was in, that meant that I could not return to school until they had spoken to my parents to get me back. And it didn't matter how many times I explained to them, it's like, look, I don't live with them. They have no say over me. Like I am the person that you should be talking to. I have a job and I'm trying to get my high school diploma because I might need it in the future. It might come in handy. I don't know. Maybe that's weird. But they wouldn't bend. They wouldn't accommodate me. It was get a note from your dad or get out. And I was like, I'm not talking to him. I'm leaving. And so I had to quit school.
School forced you to quit school.
School forced me to quit school because I would have gone on. One of the things that I was secretly hoping that I was going to do in my final year of high school was that I was going to beat the hell out of all my grades so I could get a Rutherford scholarship and actually go to university to study English literature. But no, the attendant policy said no. So I started working minimum wage jobs because that's what you can get when you're a high school dropout. Paying rent, having roommates, getting by, having the drama that you have when like your whole life depends on your next paycheck, and if you don't get it, everything bad is going to happen to you. Mm-hmm. And just like the stress of all of that. And so what ended up happening was I didn't really do a lot of writing in those years because I was too busy trying to survive it. And I don't think it's a coincidence that like when I got into writing, like I didn't have a job, I was looking for a job, but I had the time to actually like sit down and become absorbed in what I was doing. But soon after that, I actually got a pretty good job at a .com that paid a salary, that had flexible hours and a really, really light workload. So I could like work on my writing in the downtime and nobody minded. It was a Word document. Obviously I'm working, it's all fine. And so like I rode that horse until I got laid off in 2003. You bet. And that like that time made it so that I knew that this was what I wanted to do, even though I was working like I worked at this .com, like I was a professional letter writer. That's what I did. And then I worked at one of the busiest gas stations in my city across the street from one of the most popular pubs in my city. Ooh. On the evening shift, the 3 to 11 shift. Ooh. On the weekend. So there were some people who frequented the Ship and Anchor in Calgary, Alberta, who knew me as the Shell Girl. And so, you know, I just bounced from job to job. I got a job at a fabric store. I got a summer job where I like basically stood at a table under a tent on Stephen Avenue Mall in Calgary, selling fruit and Tabor corn for cash. It was a cash money job. And so then somebody would come and get me and we would do the inventory and I got paid in cash. And the money wasn't bad. And I did that for a little while. I worked as a cashier so many times. I never worked as a waitress because I suck at it. I'm terrible. Don't ask me coffee order. I'm going to forget in 2 seconds. And then I had this really interesting job where I discovered that I had a weird talent. I had cover lettered my way into a job where an entomologist and a business major were trying to make home decorating business of butterfly specimens in shadow boxes. And I thought they were pretty. Okay, a bit morbid, but pretty. Sure, I think probably a lot of people were like, because when I was working at the retail cart, because when I was working in the office, but I would go to work in the retail cart. If one of the retail cart girls called in hungover and couldn't do her shift, so I would go do the shift. But what I heard the most often from people is, are those real? It's like, yeah. So they're dead? I'm like, well, yes. How do you kill them? Like, oh my goodness. Look, it's blue and shiny, really pretty. But, people kind of resisted that. But on my first day at the job, I got handed a bunch of mounted butterflies in boxes. And it was like, I'm going to teach you how to properly do this later, but can you sort these so that the same kinds of butterflies are alike? And I said, sure. And he came back and he's like, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm sorting them so that the butterflies are alike. And so like there was a particular species, it was dark blue with light blue spots and like kind of like almost like orange creamsicle spots and white spots. And they all looked kind of alike. And my boss looked at what I'd done because I had, instead of like a one stack of all of these butterflies, I had a row. And some of the stacks were 8 boxes high and some of the stacks were 3 boxes high and some of this, and he was like, what are you doing? And so he went and he looked and he realized that I had separated them by subspecies visually, by like, this one has 2 dots on the edges of the wing down here, and this one only has 1 kind of level of detail. And he was just sort of like, okay, I'm stealing you. You are not a file clerk. You work for me now. And so like for a couple of years, my whole life was looking at butterflies and deciding like what their scientific names were by subspecies, cataloging them, and like figuring out the inventory. And okay, it was a weird job, but I really liked it.
So then so all of that, we wrap up, we take all of that history, all of those experiences, all of that living, and you decide that fantasy is what you want to write, right? And having just finished the Kingston cycle, which I loved, and we're going to have some gushing moments, mostly you listening to me gush love on you, but we'll get there. But how do we get to you writing fantasy? And did those experiences of, because I'm already hearing themes, right? Like education, employment, labor, flying animals, like all of those show up in the Kingston cycle. But I'm just curious how and why you chose fantasy, or was it the other way around? Did fantasy choose you?
Okay, I went to an elementary school in Surrey, BC. That's where I was a kid. And that particular school had a program that was, their mission was is that every child who graduated from this school would love to read. That was what they wanted to say. We want you to love books. We don't care what books you read. We don't want you to read classics. We want you to read what you like. So read it. And when we did class projects, often the stories that we would be reading together were children's fantasy or science fiction novels. I read A Wrinkle in Time. I read The Last of the Really Great Wang Doodles. I read The Secret World of Og. I read Bridge to Terabithia. I read, and it just kind of like, I got everything from space opera to like kind of like slipstreamy magical realism as a child. And it stuck. I kept reading fantasy novels. I read a lot of fairy tales. I read a lot of children's fantasy novels. There wasn't really much in the way of YA back then. And so I wound up like reading adult novels at like 13, 14 years old. Some of them probably I shouldn't have read.
There's a lot of VC Andrews.
Oh yeah. We had a whole book club about VC Andrews.
And Anne Rice's dark fantasy, like not only the vampire stuff, but like she wrote under Anne Rockwell or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, I shouldn't have read Belinda. There's a lot of stuff.
I shouldn't have read those either.
I'm glad I did though.
And so yeah, I mean, I loved what I was reading, and I also was reading like superhero comic books. I was reading the X-Men, but I was deep into the New Mutants. I loved the New Mutants. I really liked Alpha Flight, and I gave a significant portion of my adolescent earnings to Marvel Comics because I was really into them. And I kept reading fantasy. I kept reading science fiction. I would go to used bookstores in Edmonton and then later on in Calgary with like $20, and I'd walk out with a whole bag of books. It was amazing. And so that's how I discovered my favorite author, Kenneth Lee, who has written so many books. I don't have a complete collection, but maybe someday. And I love like the way that she wrote her stories. I loved the lush prose, and I loved, like, my favorite books by her were stories in which it wasn't like a hero who had to defeat the dark other one who was going to plunge the world into like darkness and tyranny or whatever. She wrote about women who who were definitely on a quest, but what they were on a quest for was their own soul, their own identity, their own sense of who they were. But they didn't go to Spain and have like a vacation fling. They rode as an archer in a chariot race in which you had to shoot targets and you had to sabotage the opponents. She wrote women who figured out how to shoplift in a world economy where people don't have money, but instead pay for things by like channeling strong emotions that science fiction hand wavium turns into the energy to power the incredible fantastical dome city that the heroine lives in. There was a young woman who found herself by selling everything she owned to buy a silver companion robot who then taught her how to stand up for herself. These kinds of stories, I loved them. I've read them over and over. And so like that's probably in there too somewhere, where what people need to find in order to conquer whatever it is out there is in here.
I just love hearing you just talk about this. It's really great. I want to read that story about the robot that helped this woman stand up for herself. That's pretty cool. I noticed that when I did some research about your writing, and when I paid attention to the ways that you described your writing, I noticed your use of adjectives and and the way that you focus on the subgenres in particular of fantasy. So for example, Midnight Bargain, which I have here, is described as more of a silver fork fantasy, which I had to actually Google because I'd never heard of that before.
It up.
You made it up?
Yeah, okay. I did.
It's a thing. Like, it actually has a definition in Wikipedia. Did you do that? Did you create that definition?
No, I didn't even know that was there.
It's a thing. Yes, it's supposed to be a fantasy that focuses on like the aristocracy and like the textiles and lifestyles of like wealthy communities in a particular period of time, I think is what I found. Yeah. And so now I want to know what you meant by that. And then also Kingston Cycle, you described it as gas lamp, this gas lamp fantasy. So but now that you talked about that butterfly story and how you really were interested in like, and had a talent for identifying subgenres, I kind of see a link here, but why don't you talk about your relationship with subgenres and what these two mean?
Okay, well, I mean, I called the Midnight Bargain silver fork fantasy because I think that's a subgenre. It's a subgenre of the subgenre called the fantasy of manners. Basically, the reason why I called the Midnight Bargain specifically silver fork fantasy is because it reflects a society that can only rise after you have the Industrial Revolution. And then I had a little bit of a wrestle about, well, if you have the Industrial Revolution, does it also mean you have colonialism? And I was like, no, I don't want colonialism. Colonialism sucks. We're not going to do that. But because the Industrial Revolution kind of changed the way that we produced fabric, clothing became a big deal. And it was 100% all about wealth display. And coming along with that wealth display was also the display of your quality as a person, your manner, your respectability, and also this environment of scrutiny where everybody examines you. They have their own kind of rubric in their head, and then they judge you on it. So like basically you move through society, and while you do that, you are telling a story about yourself, but it's the readers who have power over it. And so there was a movement in literature after Jane Austen that was called the Silver Fork novel. And they were books that were primarily concerned with the affairs of the British aristocracy very specifically, and about how they lived their lives. But most of the Silver Fork authors were wealthy middle-class women who were looking up in a way. And eventually what ended up happening was it took this admiration for this class and was kind of like, you know what, this kind of sucks. These people are shallow. These people, they do these things and they're kind of wrong. And then the Silver Fork kind of became a satire at the end of it all, because the examining this particular state for too long started to really point out the flaws and the problems, and it wasn't changing anything. So they just started making fun of it. And I was thinking, I feel like this book with its concerns, it's very much that Silver Fork kind of thing, because Ianthe and Nisbetta are like super rich and socially powerful and politically powerful. And Beatrice is a respectable member of the middle class, not like we're technically middle class because we can't be born into the aristocracy, but we're rich as thieves, just kind of there. And I wanted to kind of look at how Beatrice's and Isbetta's lives were kind of fettered by their class. That was one of the things that I wanted to talk about. Kingston Cycle gets called a gaslamp fantasy because it's not steampunk, and I didn't want people to think it was steampunk.
Yeah.
Because technically Kingston Cycle is right on the edge of changing to electricity, only that's bad, for reasons which we will reveal in the books.
Yes, we're gonna get into. Well, we're not gonna spoil it, but we're gonna get into it. We have to get into it. We're gonna spend a lot of time talking about this. Okay, and I realized when you were talking, so you coined the sort of Silver Fork fantasy, that term, as a subgenre, not necessarily Silver Fork, because that was already a thing.
Yeah.
Silver Fork fiction. Okay, I understand what you mean. I think I didn't appreciate the distinction when I was looking it up. I just saw Silver Fork fiction. With authors like Catherine Gore and stuff like that.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So we've talked about your writing journey. I want to talk about you a little bit. Mm-hmm. The reason I want to talk about you is because, as you may know, so Onyx Pages, what I do on YouTube is very niche. I specifically read Black science fiction and fantasy, the Black speculative. Mm-hmm. In particular, I'm trying not to use particular too often. I like to focus on queer writers, gender diverse writers, because I'm a Black queer woman and I've spent most of my life reading works of fiction and nonfiction that don't concern my people or don't care about my people. And I'm done because I'm grown, and fuck that. So now that I get to choose what I read and choose how I spend my dollars and my time, I've made the decision that I want to explore the diversity that is the Black speculative in literature. So identity is very important to me, and I do not make any apologies for that. So I'm very interested in your identity and how, especially given what you write and what you're interested in. We've talked to, like, even coming off the conversation of Silver Fork, like, I'm particularly not interested in the stories of colonial powers or anything like that. So I wouldn't necessarily be attracted to stories. Like, I'm not attracted to Jane Austen or any of that kind of writing.
Mm-hmm.
So how does your identity like sort of relate to the work that you've written, and just what's that relationship been like? What is it now?
Okay, well, let's see, where do I start? I'm Black. Okay, my mother is white, but I am Black. And one of the things that was always going on with that was growing up. I lived with a lot of white people. I lived with a lot of white people. I had white teachers, I had white classmates, I had white friends. I had my Black family and I lived with them. But it was a little bit strange. I was a very sensitive child. I cried very easily. Things hurt me very deeply, and nobody was terribly interested in like toughening me up, but they were very interested in protecting me. So there were a lot of things about growing up Black that nobody explicitly told me because it might upset me, but I experienced them anyway. So the result is that I kind of felt a little bit crazy, because I didn't, like, I was like, there's something going on here and I don't know what it is. And there wasn't anybody going, honey, it's racism. Just like, this is what it is. I just kind of grew up thinking it wasn't good enough all the time. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I finally like kind of was like, wait. And so it was like, as a kid, as a teenager, as an adult, when anybody would ask me, so do you think you're Black or do you think you're white? I was like, oh, I'm definitely Black. I mean, what are you talking about? But I didn't really know. There was a lot of stuff I didn't know until I was like an adult. And so part of my early writing experience, again, was surrounded by white people. And it wasn't like they were trying to erase my Black identity. It was that nobody was really thinking about it at the time. And the books that I read and the people that I talked to and the writers that I worked with, didn't really like, I wrote stories about white people because I read stories about white people. And it wasn't until later that I was like, wait a minute. I don't necessarily have to do this. I mean, I can, that's fine, but I don't have to. I can do more things. But I like started to get published before I really figured that out. And I know that when you were talking to me at first about coming to do an interview, one of the things that I said was, well, I need to be clear with you. It's only recently that I've started to include Black characters in my books in a prominent way, that I'm going through this change, this transformation. So that's important. The other thing that's important is, I would say, my queer identity. I knew from an early age that there was something more than just, I like boys. It was kind of like, you know what? I like you. I like you. Say, you're a girl. That's fine. No problem. I don't mind that at all. But when I was coming to this realization, it was 1980. And so I was like 10, 11 years old. I knew what was going on. I already knew how to keep my mouth shut about it. And so I did. I kept it quiet. And for like a few years, when I came to Alberta, I kept quiet about the fact, while people around me made jokes about gay people, who made jokes about them dying of AIDS, who basically said that it didn't matter. It wasn't actually a problem because the people who were getting sick were degenerate. I'm like, okay, bitch, you're talking about me and I don't appreciate it. But I kept my mouth shut because I didn't want to get in trouble. It was junior high. Junior high kids are monsters. And like, I didn't want to be any more of a target than I already was. So I kept quiet about it. I got into high school, and then I started to notice. I started to notice people who were like me, people who were into girls, and people who were into the people who weren't necessarily interested in being solidly a girl or solidly a boy, or people who were trans and stuff like that. Like I liked people. I liked their personalities. I liked their aesthetic. I liked their style. I just thought they were interesting people. And at the time, we like had a separation of terms a little bit. Some people would say that they were bisexual. Some people would say that they were pansexual, and I was definitely on the side of the pan. And so it isn't until much later that the identities started to merge in really interesting ways, which I think is kind of neat. I'm glad that like cis essentialism is relaxing.
Yeah.
But in some ways it isn't. Like, there's like really, really strong resistance to trans identities of all kinds. I myself have like encountered nonsense since I basically decided to say publicly earlier in the spring. It's like, look, I caucus with women, but I am not one of them. And people...
that needs to be on a t-shirt.
I would love a t-shirt, a black t-shirt with white print on it that said, I caucus with women, but I am not one of them. And so like I got some pushback. I got some people following me, and and I got people who would argue with me about it. They were like, how can you decide this now? You're 50. And I'm like, well, I kind of already knew before then. I already was like thinking of like clothing and hair and fashion as like costume, as like something that you put on to project whatever it was that you wanted to project. That clothing was communication, and what I wanted to communicate wasn't necessarily gendered, but that I wasn't like butch. That wasn't what I was doing, even though it would have been much easier. It was that I wanted the whole thing to pick from. I wanted to be able to kind of mercurially fluctuate between the gender and do, you know, whatever it was that I felt like I needed to do that day. And so that's been a really important part of my recent expression. And it's Zellen's fault. Like, I don't know how many times I've heard this story about, well, I decided that I was going to include a character of this identity, this queer identity that I'm kind of interested in. And guess what? And Zellen was totally like that, because when Kate came to me, I was like, Zellen, you are marvelous. You are wonderful. You are this gorgeous ethereal being. And some people might ask, but are you really a boy or a girl? I don't care, because it's immaterial. It doesn't matter. I don't even know. Like, if anybody asked me, I'm like, I don't know. He never told me.
I like her as a character, and yes, we shall. That's, thank you for sharing. And I was looking over to the side, not because I wasn't listening, but I was looking to see, because my favorite picture of you is, and it's the first picture of you, it's where you're like, it's half of your face and you're doing this.
Yeah.
And I can't find it right now, but maybe I'll slide it in here, But that's the first picture of you I ever saw. And I was just like, I need to talk to that person because I'm not sure, like that picture said to me that there's a story there. It felt like this, it was a very queer story. But I just didn't know what it was. And it wasn't my story to decipher necessarily. But yeah, that totally connects. And I see the evolution even of your artist portraits. And, you know, I can see a shift there in terms of like how, you know, you're presenting to the world. And it's nice to meet you post, you know, self-emancipation in that place, right? Like it's nice to be able to hear that and then to appreciate what you've written in light of that. You talk in your autobiography, like your bios, you talk about school, you talk about being a cyclist. And I wonder, as a cyclist myself, I wonder about the intimacy of being a cyclist and how it allows you to engage with the communities around you. And of course, I mean, the characters in the Kingston cycle, like they get around the world either by horse-drawn or mystical animal-drawn carriages or bicycles. And so I'm curious, in addition to just, you know, who you are, how your identity as a cyclist, which is prominent in your bios, influence what you write and how you write and how your characters maneuver.
Okay, so funny story. When I was a little kid, I couldn't ride a bike. I was terrified riding a bike. But all my friends rode bikes, so I really wanted to do it, but I was really scared. So I talked to them about this problem. I was like, I want to ride bikes with you, but I'm really afraid that I'm going to fall off. I was like, put training wheels on your bike. It's fine. You know, whatever. We understand you. So I put training wheels on my bike, and I literally rode my bike with training wheels for months. I like wore the wheels off. And then somebody was like, I think it was my friend Pam, was like, just try it without the training wheels. Try it. And she was like, and I'm like, but I'll fall. She's like, if you fall, I promise to kiss your boobies myself. Try it.
I love that. We all need that friend.
Oh yeah. I mean, Pam Dreger, you're wonderful. And
but so, also, isn't that incentive to fall though?
I did not fall. Pam did not have to kiss my boo-boos, but the promise that she would, it was like, basically, if you fall and if this hurts, I will be there to comfort you, was enough for me to give it a try. And what do you know? I could ride a bike. And so
thank you, Pam.
I really loved it. And then when I was 16, I joined a club in my high school, and it was like, basically it was the Panier cycling club. And I was like, basket cycling club, what does that even mean? So I showed up, right? I don't have a bike. I just wanted to know. And so they explained that what we were going to do is we're going to bring our bicycles in, we're going to learn how to overhaul them, and then we're going to go on a series of escalating field trips where we would pack everything that we needed to go camping on a bicycle, go to campground. And then the ultimate goal was that we were going to like take the train to Kamloops, and then we were going to cycle the Hope Princeton route through the Cascade Mountains to Vancouver in 1986.
No.
And I was like, oh, okay, I have a bike. So I went home that day and I made dinner. And I was sitting down to dinner with my stepmother and my father and my little baby sister. And they were like, what do you do at school today? I said, I went to something called the Panier Cycle Club. And they like go camping. They like pack everything in these bags and they take a 10-speed bicycle down the road to go camping. And this sounds crazy. And I was like, I got a bike, you can use it. Okay. So I joined the club. And we did these trips where I would like pack all of my stuff in a tent, and I would like ride down Highway 16 westward, get to Wadman Lake, pitch a tent, hang out, pack it all up, and go back. It was like, I don't know, a 2-hour ride out of the city on a bicycle on the side of a highway with like great big trucks. I don't know why I liked it, but I did. And then I started using my bike to get around to go to school in Edmonton. And then my bike got stolen and I didn't ride my bike for a little while. And then I bought another bike here in Calgary because I'd seen blogs about people doing transportation cycling.
Yeah.
On these like pretty step through bicycles, riding slowly, and their gorgeous outfits and just like living the life that I wanted. So I went out and got myself a bicycle. I got a Linus bike.
Yes.
It's a Dutchy 3 with internal 3-gear speed. And honestly, Calgary's fat as a pancake. That's all you need.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a step through, sage green, had a back bicycle rack. I had a basket on the front. I have these amazing shopping bags that I got from Mountain Equip Co-op that they don't make anymore. And I became a transportation cyclist. And I loved it. I loved like just, it didn't matter that I was taking a really long winding route along the river to get to places that I wanted. It was peaceful. It was meditative. Yeah. It was thoughtful. It was fun. And group rides are amazing. Group rides is why I decided that the Kingston cycle, like the people of Kingston, eschewed cars, that they didn't like, they exist, but nobody actually wants them because everybody rides bikes. And because I felt like it created that social fabric of the city that I had read about in the work of Jane Jacobs, who is a really big influence on me. She wrote a book called The Death and Life of Great American Cities, where she talks about her experience as a resident in big cities like New York. She lived in the West Village, and she was the person who wound up organizing the village around stopping, this really powerful city planner from like mowing down the village in order to put like a humongous highway down that area of New York. She stopped it. And she's been a thorn in the side of city planners for the rest of her life. She died, I guess, about 20 years ago. And she talks about what makes a neighborhood great. And there are like these factors, and I won't get into it because it's a whole lecture, but being in a group ride with a bunch of cyclists was the spirit of what Jane Jacobs was talking about, because we didn't know each other. We didn't have to know each other. We were on sidewalk terms with one another. We chatted casually as we rode our bike to the ice cream store. We got gelato. We cycled back. And just like the whole idea, I was like, imagine that you're going to work and you're on a bicycle and you're on a road and you own the road, because everybody is riding bicycles except for people with too much money or mobility problems. They are taking carriages that are designed to get them from place to place. And you're stopped at an intersection and you turn to the person next to you and you go, it hasn't rained in a week. What's going on? I was like, I know, it's terrible. And you just keep going.
And I have to say that, so I'm a cyclist as well. I go on and off, like I'll take all modes of transportation. I don't own a car yet. But I am a transportation cyclist. And I work in like the downtown of my city, and I live on the west end of my city, and it's a 45-minute ride. It can be a 20-minute ride. It can be an hour-long ride. But I could ride along the lake every day to get to work. And there are bike lanes and kids and geese and bees and all sorts of things on the way. And it's a very different experience to ride your bike to work, to put your lunch and your books and your laptop in your bag, to put on a helmet and to, like, you know, get 2 hours of exercise out in nature, and it's such a pleasure. So I restarted doing that this year. And I noticed, like, first of all, I didn't even know what a Peloton was. And I learned the word because of you. So thank you, vocabulary. But there was just so much intimacy. And in one of your, which one was in Witchmark, there's like a bike chase. And I was reading and I was like, they gave us a bike chase. Like, I'm reading an actual bike chase. Like, my heart was pounding. I was like, oh my God, there's a bike chase. I just never seen that before in a book, and absolutely loved how much the bicycle was a part of the story, right? Like that there was community in the draft, and there's just like all of this amazing stuff. So thank you for that. I want to move into, I was going to ask you about being a Canadian writer, and I wonder if, well, do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because I think it's important to me as a reader, but I'm wondering, once you get published, does the fact that you are Canadian, does that shift anything for you? Maybe I'll ask you that before we get into the actual book.
I think probably like when I was like working with the people on the Del Rey online writing workshop. That workshop was, of course, headquartered in the United States. It was sponsored by Del Rey Books, which was a New York publisher. Yeah. Most of the people in the workshop were American. There were some Canadians as well. And like, other than some jokes about Tukes and Tim Hortons, it didn't really seem like a big deal. Mm-hmm. But what I found when I kind of got the sense later on, like once I had published and everything, I'd kind of gotten the sense later on from a few Canadian writers and people who were interested in specifically Canadian literature that I'd sold out because I went to an American publisher. And so I was just sort of like, well, I mean, like, I write science fiction. What was I supposed to do? And so there was a little bit of that going on, but like, yeah. Canada has a science fiction and fantasy writer scene. Mm-hmm. I didn't really get into it. I like attended like fan-run fantasy and science fiction conventions as a fan when I was like in my 20s. But I like wasn't really concerned with the writing part of it. I just wanted a room party with nerds who knew what Babylon 5 was. Fair. And that made me happy. And so when I started to make connections with writers, it was mostly with writers in the States and not necessarily with writers in Canada. So that's a little bit of like part of the reason why I kind of felt relatively unknown in the Canadian science fiction scene, was because like I fell in with a bunch of Americans and didn't even really realize that I was one of a very few.
Right. Fair. So let's now talk about your books. So, what's the story about?
Well, the story is about a young woman named Beatrice Claiborne, who was born with the power to do magic. Magic is passed on, it's hereditary in this world. And there's a couple of factors that make it so that women who have magic are quite frankly oppressed. They are, like, I'm sorry, that's just the way it is. Yep. So she's 18. And it is time for her to find a husband, and she can marry up because while she is a respectable middle-class girl, she has a gift of sorcery. And like, rich wizards want that because they want wizard babies. And so her father, who has fallen on hard times and is trying desperately to hold it together, but is sitting on a mountain of debt, spends a whole lot of money to take her to the most popular marriage market in the spring, which is known collectively as bargaining season, to catch the richest husband she can get her hands on. Beatrice doesn't want that. She wants to be a magician. because secretly she has learned how to do magic beyond the simple rhyming charms that children know and are considered harmless. She has gotten into more serious spells, and now she is about to seriously call on a minor magical spirit in order to help her win her goal. Most, like, you can do little itty bitty magics. You can light a candle with your own power. You can flip a coin with your own power, like that sort of thing. Like, not terribly big things. If you want to do big magic, then you need to do a summoning ritual to attract a spirit, and then you need to strike a deal with that spirit, and you have to give the spirit something that the spirit wants. And what the spirit wants is to have a body. They want to be able to walk. They want to be able to dance. They want to be able to see and hear and taste and touch. They want to eat things. They want to drink things. They want to experience what it is to be alive in a body. It's just one problem. Spirits do not have a moral sense. They are eternally 3 years old. They don't know what's right and what's wrong, and you can't teach them. And they want bodies. That's what they want. And the best possible host for a spirit is to possess the body of an unborn child and be born as a human. Do you hear Anne Rice in this? I hope you do. Just a little bit. I had some things to say about the witching hour.
Yes.
And so what ends up happening is that you have this baby, this adorable baby who seems terribly willful. And then once they get to be about 3 years old and you need to teach them no, they get really upset because all they understand is that they can't get that they want. Mm-hmm. This person is stopping them from getting what they want. And when they throw temper tantrums, things light on fire.
Right.
So it's not good. It's really, really not good. And in order to prevent this, women who are magicians have to wear a piece of jewelry that specifically protects them against spirit possession, but it also takes their ability to do magic away. Beatrice doesn't want this. Mm-hmm. So she is on the lookout for a way to, like, kind of do an end run around the whole bargaining process. Yeah. What she's going to do is she's going to figure out how to summon an extremely powerful spirit and bind it to her, which is what the male magicians do when they are master magicians. So she's going to do that. That's what she's going to do. And then once she's done that, she can't get married. She has to be a magician, but that's okay because she'll help her father get out of debt once she's done that. But she meets a girl who wants the same tool that she wants in order to further her career as an illicit magician. And she meets the girl's brother, who is cute and nice and considerate and kind and thoughtful, and he likes her. And so now she's like, this is exactly what my family wants for me. He's beautiful, he's rich, he's got huge tracts of land. He can solve my family's problems. He can make sure my little sister Harriet gets a really good bargaining season because she actually wants that. And I like him. I really, really do. Or I can throw all that away and become a magician. And I want that. I really, really do. And so the book is about these two forces kind of pulling her this way and then that way, as she tries to, like, find the solution that's going to make sense for her in the end. And it's a fantasy romance, so that kind of gives you an idea of how it turns out at the end.
Cool. I like this. Magical Regency fantasy.
Yeah, it gets compared to Bridgerton a lot because the
does.
TV adaptation, the male hero is black, And in this book, the male hero is Black, and her friend, his sister, is also Black. And instead of like basically being like we're enemies, they're like, let's work together. And then it's like, we're ride or die friends. I will hold the window while you escape, buddies. Like, and I love it.
And so what was your inspiration for writing this? Like, why did you write this story at this particular time? Because I have seen Bridgerton mentioned, you know, in the same sentence as The Midnight Bargain all the time.
Yeah. The funny thing is that I never read those books. I didn't read The Duke and I didn't read any of the Bridgerton series, although I do read historical romances.
Mm-hmm.
Those ones never like crossed my radar. Like, they came out at the wrong time for me. So I didn't know about them. And so it was just this weird coincidence that my book came out shortly before Bridgerton aired on Netflix. And now the two of them are like,
yes,
all together.
Which is great.
Which is great. And so my inspiration was that, like, you said that you didn't read Jane Austen. I have. I've read all of that Jane Austen. I read Sanderton. I read it all. And like, I read it when I was young and I didn't really get it. And then I read it when I was 20 and I got it a little bit better. And then I did it because we were going to watch the BBC Pride and Prejudice 4-part miniseries, and I didn't really know the book. And so that was a really good experience. And that basically made me interested specifically in Jane Austen's works. And so I had this influence going on where I took the next kind of development from Jane Austen's work, which was the social season in London, which is the subject of many a 19th century historical romance novel. And I decided that I wanted to mess with that because it's fun. It's like this whole pageant of performance. You have to perform wealth, you have to perform gentility, you have to perform congeniality. You pretty much have to like execute a complicated social strategy in order to determine your future. And I just thought it was so terrifying and yet fascinating that I wanted to write about it.
Yes, the closest I got to that. I mean, I watched a little bit of Bridgerton. I don't want to talk about Bridgerton. I watched a little bit of it, and I do find it very interesting. Anne of Green Gables was actually like where I got into some of that, and yeah. But anyway, so I am looking forward to reading it, and congratulations for all the hype and buzz and success for this book.
What do you mean? Like, I had no idea. I wrote the book for fun. I wanted a fun escape. I just wanted to like cut loose on something that would probably amuse only me. But it didn't turn out that way. It turned out that it turned out that lots of people were looking for this particular intersection of things that I like. And so like I was bowled over when I found out that the book had been chosen for Canada Reads.
Yeah.
The Canada Reads, the lead up to Canada Reads, and the competition itself was so different from anything that I had ever experienced. I learned a lot about what it is to be an author in public from Canada Reads, because they put you there. There you are. You can't just like, hide and write tweets about your lunch. And, every once in a while you get to brag on it. It's like, well, I decided what I really needed to do was I needed to write a letter to fellow Canada Reads finalist Justin Trudeau and tell him that we need basic universal income. and it's just sort of like, yeah, and I didn't win, but I'm on that list forever, and it's kind of awesome.
Good. Well, congratulations. It's well deserved. I want to talk about the Kingston cycle now.
Okay.
Because wow. I will be honest, like when I went into it, I was like, okay, so there aren't Black main characters until the third book. Am I going to survive this trilogy? Why am I doing this to myself? It is not grand. Right? And I wasn't sure. And I'm like, you know what? Let me do it, right? Let me do it. I'm being transparent with you. I'm like, let me do it because I trust you. I'm intrigued by the story. And it feels like this particular trilogy followed you along a journey of like identity and coming out as an author in several different ways around identity. And I was like, I want to witness that. I want to be there for that and experience that. So I read the trilogy and I loved it. My favorite was obviously SOULar, which came out in February of 2021. But altogether, I just enjoyed it. So it was a delight. Your writing is phenomenal. After reading each book, I literally had to stop and just be like, how do I feel? And I liken the feeling that I had after reading each book to the feeling that I have after I finish a good meal at a fancy new restaurant with perhaps like new cuisine. That's how I felt after finishing each book. I was just like, now I haven't done that. I haven't had that before. Let me just like let that settle and see how I feel about it. That was amazing. You introduced me to a world I would not have entered into otherwise. It like the introduction of different kinds of technology, the relationships, like it was very, very intimate. And when I hear you talk about like the that period in time where like you really had to present yourself as a particular in a particular place in the, social and economic, stratification of community. Like I very much saw that. I saw class play out and, references to etiquette that I didn't really expect, but that I kind of got a little bit of as a kid. The politics of it, the law of it, you got gentrification in there. You got there was so much going on. There was also like a kind of cozy mystery feel to some of it and like whodunits and there was a lot. There's so many flavors to this trilogy. And I don't know that I'm fully getting it all because I'm so fresh out of it, but it's brilliant. I'm so happy that I read the Kingston cycle. I'm a little bit in awe of how much you were able to do. And I think that's the mark of talent, right? How much you're able to do in a short period of time. I think the longest book is 344 pages. Perhaps the shortest was like 302. So they're not tomes, but they're so robust. So I will just say, just overall, it was a satisfying delight, and it took me by surprise. Not the quality of it, but the diversity of what I was able to get. And it also sort of opened my eyes to how much opportunity writers have to introduce readers to diversity and to interesting and new ideas. I felt that you were very respectful toward the reader, right? Like you respected the intelligence, my ability to put things together. And when you needed to sort of lean in and just like, draw lines between the dots, that was good for me, because there were a couple places, had you not done that, I would have gotten lost, especially around like the magical system. But this was such a pleasure. So thank you very much. I really, really enjoyed the Kingston cycle. I really did. I'm kind of like, I'm a little bewitched by it right now, honestly. And I had a sensation that I just want to share with you as a reader.
Mm-hmm.
I found myself missing characters. Like in Storm Song, I missed Tristan. In SOULar, I missed Avia Jessup. Like I was like missing the characters. I was like, when am I going to see them again? Like an old friend, right? Like, when am I going to come? And then every time I'd be like, oh, Miles, Miles is back, right? How's he doing? Is he better? Has he like, I was just so lovely. And I will say I hybrid read these. So I read them on the page and, you know, I annotated. And in this case, I actually like bedazzled some of the pages, which I'll show you. So,
Oh
you know,
gosh.
yeah, so I haven't finished it. I'll do a video about that.
Oh wow.
But like I got into the actual like writing and stuff and highlighted and things like that. That's going too fast. You can't see the highlights. These ones are purple. But I also listened to them as well, as audiobooks and followed along. And it was it was wonderful. Like this, on this page, I have like all of these like hearts because I was like, I love what I'm reading right now. And it was just it was such a pleasure. The humor, there are lots of LOLs. Yeah, it was a pleasure to read this trilogy. So let's start with just, again, how would you describe the Kingston cycle, and perhaps each of the 3 books, in your own words? So let's tell folks who haven't had the pleasure of reading this yet what the Kingston cycle is about.
Okay. I have kind of I guess maybe a little bit weird. I think the Kingston cycle is telling a story of the capital city of a nation as it shifts from a parliamentary monarchy to a parliamentary democracy in truth. And that what I'm focusing on is that there were some points in which if these characters hadn't made these choices, this would have never come about.
Yeah, agreed.
And so I start talking about Miles Singer. And like Miles was like drawing on my feelings of how much I had to hide, like growing up as like an adolescent and a teenager in the 80s during the AIDS crisis, where it's like, I am not heterosexual, and that my thing where I wound up in the queer community in Edmonton, and the thing was is that if you were in it, you didn't talk about it, but you were in it because you had to keep it a secret. So like Miles, like keeping his origins a secret was something that like I really, really resonated with, that he needed to hide who he really was in order to be safe. And then of course it falls apart. And the way that it falls apart is with this family dynamic, because his father is an absolute bastard. Just
hate him.
Evil. Just awful. Like, what a horrible person. Like, he never lifted a hand to Miles, and yet he damaged him so profoundly. And even though like Grace was the good child, the favored one, she was abused just as profoundly, but he chose a different technique with her. But they were both gaslit. They were both like meant to like have a deeply twisted view of the world that suited his purposes and would forward his goals, never mind what they wanted. I don't know if you caught it, but on my Patreon, I have a series. It's called the Witchmark Preludes, and it's a series of 4 scenes that happen before the events of Witchmark happen, that are kind of like around Miles Singer before the book takes place. And then I did it again with Grace's thing, because I wanted to, like, I really needed to explore what it was like to be the good child in this deeply abusive family dynamic. So I have Miles, who doesn't want to have anything to do with his family, and he was willing to sacrifice his deeply loving relationship with his sister in order to do it. And I know that a lot of people had huge conflicts with this, because Grace is an ass in the first book. She really is. She really is, but she loves her brother, and her brother loves her. And so it made things really difficult. But the thing is about Grace is that she believed that what she was doing was right. As soon as she saw that it was wrong, she's like, okay, fuck this. I'm not doing that anymore. And the second book is about Grace. It's about Grace, like, basically having to face the truth that she didn't know, and getting deep on how far the lie went. Because at the start of the novel, she's like, well, obviously we need to fix this. This is a huge problem, but we can't let anybody find out because it will dissolve the state in rage. We have to do this very carefully. And at the end of the book, she's like, screw you. And like, writing that transformation was wonderful for me, because I felt like I understood what Grace had going on in the first book, but there wasn't really a lot of opportunity to show that she really sincerely did want what was best for the country and for the people. It's just that what she had been taught was for the best was not actually for the best at all. And there wasn't an opportunity to show that. So Grace is an ass in book one.
And part of book two.
And for the first part of book two. And so you get the chance.
Book three.
Like
Grace can be a little bitch. I'm sorry.
She's got that bitch energy, and she's not afraid to use it when it suits her purposes. Because Grace is a person who is used to having a lot of power. She is used to having obvious state power, so that if she wants something, it's gonna get done. And you can't, like, even as she was like, you know what, I have to abdicate my position as chancellor and change things dramatically, she still got that. She still got that expectation that when she says she wants something, it's gonna happen. SOULar, I was like not very far into writing Storm Song. I had a 2-book contract with Tor.com, and I was talking to my editor, and I said, I kind of feel like the story is a little bit, I don't know how I can finish it in the second book. I think it needs a third book. And we talked about it a little bit, and I was like, how do I mush these concepts together? And my editor was like, hang on, I'll get back to you. And not all that long later, he had a contract for a third book. It's like, here you go, problem solved. And I'm like, yes. So I got the chance to write about Robin, because Robin is in Witchmark a tiny bit, and Robin is in Storm Song a tiny bit, and you get to see enough of her. Oh, I can't hear you.
I wasn't speaking. I was just like, I love Robin.
Oh, she's awesome. And the thing is that you get to see this from the beginning. Robin is awesome. As soon as you meet her, you realize that she is the nurse who makes everything happen. She knows everything. She sees everything. And she knows how to organize in order to get the power of whatever community that she's in to get what they need. But she's also that person who doesn't really consider herself to be the front face of the group that she's in. She's the person who knows all. She's the person who sees all. She's the person who organizes and facilitates all. She does a lot of work, and then she's back there while the head of the nurses union gets the credit. While the head of the people's movement gets the credit. So like, she does all the work, Jacob Clark is the face, and this is basically what she does. And so when she winds up in a situation where she has to be the face, it kind of stresses her out a little bit. I mean, who wouldn't? Like, this is something she's never done before. And I have a picture of Robin as being a very capable person, but also a person who defines themselves as capable. It's like, I'm capable. I don't want to do this. It's like, here's the thing you don't know how to do.
Yeah, I loved how capable she is. I loved her hardness and her softness. Like, she's just a really complex character, who I really appreciated and learned a lot from, actually, during this story. I just noticed something on the cover that I didn't notice before. So these are actually, like, if you in the shape of people. And I didn't notice that before. So
yeah, like, those are the ghosts.
I didn't notice that until I looked over while you were speaking, and I was like, "Oh my God, those are spirits!" That's like
so great.
So, I see, and this is the thing. Like, this, if you look at this book sideways, like, you see all sorts of different things. Like, it's like a prism. It's very well done. Okay, so anyway, let's move on. So I was going to ask you, and I think you answered this, why each of the books was written from a different perspective. But I'm curious as to what, so for those of you who haven't read this, the first book is written from the perspective of Miles Singer, the second from his sister Grace, and then the third from Robin's perspective. And what did that allow you to do?
Well, the trilogy vision wasn't, like, when I first wrote the novel Witchmark, I wrote that novel, and that was it. I was done. I didn't query it out. And the editor who wanted to buy it was like, "This is great. Do you have a sequel?" And I'm like, "Oh no. Crap. Yeah, I have a couple of ideas."
Yes.
But the idea that I had wasn't necessarily about following Miles, because I kind of felt like the thing that he needed to get out of this novel, he had achieved. So when you see Miles in the future books, it's because he has achieved what he needed to achieve, like his own internal character arc, struggle, realization, transformation. He did it in the first novel. And there didn't really feel like there was a satisfying way for me to present Miles with another character arc challenge. So I passed the baton to somebody who desperately needed to change.
Yes. And apart from missing, because in each subsequent book, I missed the main character of the book before. So I felt that. Apart from that, I really loved the different changes of points of view. It was really, really well done. Your magic system, we've got witches, we've got mages, we've got these amaranthines. I don't even know yet how to describe them. We've got ghosts. I want to talk to you about those ghosts, but help me sort of understand how you built this system, what inspired you, what were the important elements of it, and feel free to talk about the system that you created.
Okay. The magic specifically, I came up with some principles that guided what ended up happening. And the first was that souls are made of magical creation power. This is one of my favorite kind of, like, where does magic come from sources. So souls are magic, and some people have souls of sufficient power and capacity that they can alter reality in accordance with their will. They are magicians. And so what I have is that the amaranthines come from, I guess you could call it like an afterlife area, like heaven or whatever. But what it is it is like a whole field of creation energy, of the stuff that makes the universe happen. It is the raw fleece of reality. That's what they live on. And they live there because they need to stabilize it. because like I have this weird thing where every single one of my books has a cosmology where there is a group of creator spirits called the makers, and they make world and they let it run, and they, oh, we fucked this up, and they leave to go do another one. And so with the witchmark thing is that there were the makers, and they made the amaranthines, and then they made the world, and then they made humans on the world, and they were like, we fucked this up, we got to go make another one. The amaranthines were like, wait, we like these humans, they're fun. We know that if you go, the whole thing is going to dissolve and the world will end, and we will end. We don't want to do that. We like existing. Can you cut us a deal? It's like, yeah, you can stay right here and you can stabilize the source of magic that runs the world. You have to stay here. And so what you need to do is you need to collect the souls that die on that planet and bring them back here, so that their soul energy comes back to the solace. And basically the idea is that spirits retain their personality until they're like, you know what, I'm bored, I want to go back. So there's reincarnation, but I don't get into it. And so the amaranthines were like, okay, that's awesome. So they are like basically maintaining the power plant, and they're gorgeous and they're capricious and they're like a little bit weird, and they can do incredible acts of magic. But they stay in the solace. There's a big backstory reason. I know what it is, but I haven't written it in a book yet.
Got it.
And so what happened is that the amaranthines noticed that there was a problem, that souls weren't coming back to the solace, and they needed to know why. So they sent somebody to go check it out.
A very special somebody.
A very special someone to go check it out.
Somebody. Mm-hmm.
But that's the basis of the magic, is that everybody has a soul. Souls are made of pure creation energy. Some people have souls that are more productive than others. And so they can do magic. But when you die, you go back to the solace, because your soul energy is what keeps the world existing. And so that was my magic system. The thing with the storms is also a part of the magic system that I didn't get a chance to talk about.
A little bit in SOULar. A little explanation. Line.
Because the Simidians probably know more than anybody else on the planet, because the cauldron is right there and they know how to sail around it, and they know that like it's bad news and that you should stay away.
Yes.
And so basically what drives the violent weather in Eland is, off the coast, there is an unnaturally warm spot of ocean that spits up hurricanes, just hurricane after hurricane after hurricane. It's winter, okay, fine. Cyclonic storm after cyclonic storm after cyclonic storm. And so the Royal Knights, their job is to control this weather so that their land isn't constantly attacked by hurricanes and tornadoes and cyclonic blizzards and incredible storms. And it has a side effect as well. They control the weather so well that they have extremely good growing conditions. They do it that way on purpose. And because they have abundant food, they have a lot of people in what's a relatively small area. Well, small if you're a Canadian. And so like all of this stuff is connected. I never get a chance to explain it because it was all deep nerd lore and I just didn't want to go there.
We got enough of it to keep the story moving along and to understand why everybody was so anxious about the storms, right? And it was enough to maintain the tension throughout all three books, because there's like a storm looming and oh my gosh, what is this going to mean for Eland, right? There's a really strong like I'm a lawyer, I'm a employment and labor and human rights lawyer, and the themes, yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah, like this book,
I wrote this book for you.
like this is for me. I don't know why you didn't like dedicate it to me, because that was really, but yeah, like, can we have like, you know, enslaved people? Can we have like labor unrest? Can we have uprisings? Like all of that, you know, that political stuff, the legal stuff, like writs and parliamentary like notices, and like all of, there was a campaign, like it was very satisfying to the political scientist in me, to the sociologist in me, to the witchy queer Black woman in me, to the poly in me. Like it was just, when I say that this book gave me so much, it did. And I was just like, and this is unfortunate for now for other books, because I'm just like, this is possible. So where are the rest of y'all at? Right?
Oh no.
No, seriously. I'm just like, see how Polk did it? Why can't all of y'all? Right? So anyway, I was really, no, it's fine. You can't say that, but I can say it as a reader. So yeah, but I maybe let's focus on the last book, SOULar. This is the one that was like closest to my own like reading interest. And I wouldn't describe myself as a romance reader, but I love romantic stories in my books. And I want to talk about these two humans. I want to talk about Zealand and Robin and their love. I first want to thank you. I was reading it, and as I read it, I thought, you know what is it that I love about this relationship? And then it clicked. It was mature. The relationship was mature. Like these were grown people.
Yes.
Like they had fights. They resolved them. They apologized. They took accountability. I'm like, come on with the like emotional vulnerability. Like there are a couple times I'm like, oh, they're fucked, it's over. And then it's like, baby, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that, that was hurtful, I understand where you're coming from. I'm like, what am I where's the angst, where's the like immaturity, where's the slam doors? And I'm like, you did it, it was great. Like and then I realized how rare it is for me to see like grown and like Black queer, you know, non-cis normative relationships that are mature and that show us like how these relationships can withstand all sorts of things, right? And I'm not sure if the intention was for either of those characters to be ace, but also like just the idea that, you know, sex wasn't like the central characteristic of the relationship, nor was it the barometer of the relationship's health. And I was just like, thank you. All of it. Tell me about Robin and Zealand.
Okay, so Robin and Zealand were high school sweethearts. They met in school. They studied together. Robin used to take the Densmore Canal back to her side of Riverside, and Zealand would just ride with her. And at first she was like, you're from up on the hill, what are you doing talking to me? It's like, I like you. No games. Yeah. Nothing like that. I like you. And I was like, is it a trick? It's like, not a trick. I like you. And I'm going to be here till you figure that out. And she figured it out. And so, but the thing is that, you know, the class thing was going on there, because while the Thorpes are a respectable family, they are on the low side of Riverside, and Zealand is from up on the hill, and there's a difference there. And so Zealand's incredibly ambitious mother. I love to write incredibly ambitious mothers. This is just the thing I do. Everybody's gonna have to get used to it.
So well, and Robin Miles voiced her so well.
Well, I listened to that book. I had to keep pausing it because I was weeping with how good it was, how perfect it was, how the voices were exactly what I wanted.
Yeah, all three. Like Grace was Avia, like I forget the narrator's name, but her Avia Jessup, she caught the like coquettish kind of flirty, but very still conservative. Mm-hmm. The most conservative flirting I've ever read. It was exquisite. But Robin is top tier and has such an ability to make you forget that she's there. Like I heard Robin Miles for like maybe a paragraph, and then I was like, boom, right, dropped into SOULar.
I was astonished when I found out that Robin Miles was going to be my narrator. I was just like, but she's the best there is.
Yeah.
What's happening? I was so glad. And then I had a conference with her where she like talked to me, like she's like, I read the book and I want to know, and she asked me these questions, and she was running voices by me, and I was just sort of like, I don't even like, this is it. I've peaked, my friends. I'm going to sleep now. Like I couldn't believe it. And then when I actually got the recording, and I had to stop. I had to stop because I was crying because it was so perfect. LeVar Burton did the same thing when he read that short story of mine for LeVar Burton Reads. I was just,
I have to listen.
It was so good. It was like he cast a spell. I wrote the book and he put me in the world, and I was like,
yeah. You know, my favorite like scene, I loved Robin Zeland, but my favorite scene was it was like the aunties in the Thorpe home.
Yes.
And the like when they were just like, you have when right at the beginning actually, when they're like, you what, like what we're gonna do, we're helping how, who, wait, what, right? And just like,
I have to go, stay where you are. It's like, oh shit, she in trouble.
Yeah. And I love how like Robin was like, yes auntie, and I was just like, I can relate. Like I can relate, right? Like when my auntie's like, come back here, there's no option, there's a period at the end of that statement.
Yes.
And just like, and the voice, anyway, go on, because yes.
Well, I mean, I wanted to talk a teeny bit about what I was intending with Robin and Zeland. And the thing is that I love romances. I really do. I love romance novels. I love romance plots. I love shipping characters. I love all that stuff. Gotcha. But what I wanted to do specifically was I wanted to show people what happily ever after actually looked like, because it ends when they have declared their commitment together. They're gonna be together forever and la 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 la, and we don't see that part. So I was like, well, what does happily ever after look like? It looks like respect for each other. It looks like listening and communicating and understanding and putting yourself in the other person's shoes and trying to do your best for them, not what you think is best for them, but your best for them.
Yeah.
And so because of Zeland's circumstances, I didn't write much in the way of like physical intimacy between the two of them, because Zeland has just been through a harrowing experience. He's trying to process that, and Robin gives her all the space he needs, and they keep talking to each other. They keep connecting in multiple ways, because it's not, you don't just connect with your bodies, you connect with your thoughts, you connect with your feelings, you connect with your hearts, you connect in a way that means you are actively knowing the other person. And that's what I wanted to show people. It's like, this is what happily ever after looks like. This is how strong it is. This is how resilient it is. This is why you can believe in it.
Yes, and I appreciate that very much. Very, 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 very much. They're so delicate and beautiful. That love is so delicate and so beautiful and affirming to have you know, a magical Black queer non-cis normative like coupling that was mature, that got happily ever after, that we got to see. That was so sweet. Thank you. Is there anything else? I don't want to stop talking to you, but I will, because we should wrap up.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's anything else for people who are reading, because, you know, folks who are watching this, some will have read some of the writing, but I do this because I want to introduce authors, and I market these interviews as a way to learn about these authors. So I'm assuming that many of the folks watching will be hearing about the writers in this series for the first time. So if that is the case, what would you like to communicate to readers who would be curious about your work and perhaps pick up your work? What is your reason for giving us all of this? What would you like to say to them?
I wanted to write these books. I wanted to write the Kingston Cycle because I wanted to talk about, well, all the stuff that happens in the novel. Like, I wanted to talk about like individual character transformation. I wanted to talk about the weight of secrets and like why people keep them, and what happens when you lose them, and what happens when you decide to shatter them. I wanted to talk about society. I wanted to talk about how capitalism needs inequality to survive, and that maybe we should change this a little bit. Maybe we're not ready for pure gay space luxury communism, but let's take some baby steps. Let's change some things. And so I wanted to like write about how when people get power, they do things to make sure that they get to keep power. Yeah. And that those things are not necessarily good for the rest of us. So there's a lot of that kind of conversation going on. A lot of which, Mark, was inspired by an Ursula K. Le Guin story, a very famous one called Those Who Walk Away from Omelas. Because when I read it, I was like, wait, hold on. Hold on a second. What do you mean they just walk away? Why don't they fix the problem? Why don't they fix the problem? And then I was like, well, what would happen? What would happen if Omelas fell? And so that's what the trilogy is about.
And I think that's one of the speculations in this particular story, right?
Yeah.
And we haven't talked about the politics of it, or the society falling and being replaced with, and all who gets to win. Like, there's just you could teach a course on this. It's so lovely. I want to use the word dense, but dense, like a
yes.
a good oil cake is dense, right?
Yeah.
Very, very good. Thank you so much for it. And so for people who are interested in Chelsea and the world, how can people reach you? How do you communicate with readers and maybe writers who are interested in learning from you, connecting with you? What are your boundaries?
Okay, so I have a website. It's clpolk.com, and that's basically just a placeholder so that people can go find out what books are out. That's what it's for. It's like, hi, this is me, these are my books, bye.
Awesome.
I have a Twitter account that I use quite a bit. I talk shit on Twitter a lot. It's clpolk. That's it. I have an Instagram account. It's not very interesting. It's just me taking pictures of stuff that I happen to like, and they're not very well composed, and they're often of my lunch. But the ID there is also CL Polk. And I have a Patreon, and the Patreon is specifically geared towards writers and the craft of writing. I call it Stuff Writing Nerds Like. I just write an article or two every month. It costs $1 to get all the content. You can donate more if you want to, but you only need $1. That's all I'm asking you for. And so like, I just, every once in a while, I'll just kind of talk about like a particular craft issue. I have a thing where you can like ask a question about the craft of writing or the business of writing, and I will do my best to answer it. If I can't answer it, I will find an expert who can. And I just like spout my opinions for $1. And those are probably the best ways to like find me. Talk to me on Twitter. If you're interested in Stuff Writing Nerds Like, join my Patreon. I have a tiny letter. I maybe send a newsletter like once a year because I'm really, really bad at it. Totally. And the link to the tiny letter is on my website. And those are the best ways to find me. I have a Facebook page. It has cobwebs. Don't believe it. It's a lie.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for your generosity and your transparency, and for your humor and for your books. This has been such a pleasure, and I really look forward to reading The Midnight Bargain. I look forward to following you as you continue to write, and I know that you're going to be one of the guests at FIACon 2021, so looking forward to that as well.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad that you asked me to come and talk to you. This has been great.
Hey everyone, now for reflection time. So, I don't know what I'll be reflecting on because we haven't had the conversation yet. But I will be pulling a card from the Harvest of Survival deck, and I'll find Editing and Njeri of the future will find a wonderful way to splice in some reflections at a later point. But for now, let's choose the card. Okay, so I'm smiling a lot in these videos. I think it's because I'm so excited, because I'm usually not a gratuitous smiler, and there's been a lot of smiling. On that note, the quote is by Albert Camus, as quoted in Emergent Strategy. The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. The only way to deal with an unfree world is to become so absolutely free that your very existence is an act of rebellion. And the question is, what is one rebellious act you are committed to in the name of freedom? So let's see how this question connects with the books.
Hello, Editing and Njeri here. I think that there is an absolute connection between that question and the Kingston cycle. I think that Chelsea said it best when they said that the Kingston cycle is ultimately a story about a society transitioning from a parliamentary monarchy to a parliamentary democracy. And I think that many of the characters, actually in each of the stories, in each of the books, the main character engages in an act of rebellion in order to bring forward emancipation. Miles does that in the first book, Grace does that in the second, Robin does that in the third, and I think that this question completely connects for reasons after editing I know that we've already discussed. Curious if you've read the book, if you would agree.
So we can talk about that in the comments. Why have I pulled a card? Because if you want to be eligible to be a lucky winner for this particular draw for a 2020 Melanin Eclectic Reading Planner, there are 4 things to do. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, share this video, and number 4, answer the prompt question. What is one rebellious act you are committed to in the name of freedom? And this is from the Harvest of Survival, an affirmation deck inspired by Octavia E. Butler. All right, everyone, I hope that you enjoyed the conversation with CL Polk, and I hope that you're enjoying this series. I will see you in the next video, and remember to always read with purpose. Bye.